Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Skeleton Crew video. It is I, your favourite galactic hostess, coming at you once again, Star Wars Meg. Yesterday, I broke down Skeleton Crew episode 5, but there is still so much more to discuss. You guys are amazing with your theories and speculation in the comments. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation and part of this amazing community. And if you haven't done so, I recommend you go and check out that video first. So I've covered some of the main Easter eggs, but today we're going a bit deeper, and I'm also going to try and answer some of your questions. We're going to start with a lightsaber, the one Wim finds in Tech Reynolds' lair, picks up, isn't able to use for obvious reasons, and then finally Jod picks up, using the Force before the episode cuts to black. Because we spent so much time talking about callbacks to the Phantom Menace and Qui-Gon Jinn, we didn't get to focus on the actual details and specifics of the actual hilt itself. I spent a bit of time looking at the design, trying to think about who may have owned it, when it was created, and when it was used. And now I think I have something of a good guess, a guesstimate. Let me explain. So, when you look at this hilt, what is the first thing you notice? Well, it's got to be the extravagant design. And what sets it apart from lightsaber hilts we're more familiar with is the golden plating. Why does this seem so familiar? If you've read the books and read the comics, it screams High Republic. I know, it's one of the more controversial time periods under Disney Star Wars, especially following The Acolyte, but it's one Lucasfilm is doubling down on, and one they keep referring back to and sprinkling into various other shows, even ones further down the timeline like this. If you're a fan of Jedi Survivor, they did the same there as well. So just based on its aesthetic, I would guess this lightsaber is about 200 or 300 years old. And it makes sense. Tech Reynolds' collection is full of relics of the ancient past. Reynolds himself was alive long before Skull Ridge Mountain was a resort. He was probably around during the High Republic, a century or two before the Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogy. It's the same with SM-33. The way he remembers planets very differently to the way they look now, during the New Republic. So it's very possible Reynolds came across a Jedi during the High Republic. But we can go further with this. Specifics of the way the lightsaber hilt has been designed give away when it was created. The majority of High Republic lightsabers are even more extravagant than this. And there was a reason, before the prequel trilogy, the Jedi decided to dial back the creativity on them, for pragmatic reasons. Due to growing conflicts with the marauders known as the Nihil, all of the Jedi, about 200 years before Episode 1, were called back to Coruscant. One of the Jedi initiatives, one of the new protocols, was to construct new lightsabers, ones that were less time-consuming, cheaper, and less varied in their designs, to be more battle-ready. I have seen some speculation this lightsaber hilt is double-ended, but to be honest, I highly doubt it, but what we can say is that this lightsaber is from the High Republic, but later in the era. The vast majority became single hilt, and for the most part, with very few exceptions, they phased out double-ended sabers, with only slight variations in emitters, colours, and grips. So while the design is old, if we're going according to Disney Star Wars canon, then it's post-Guardian Protocol and not as old as we may think. I don't think it's Old Republic, but still centuries old from the standpoint of the characters in the show. And here's the thing, I was hesitant to really go into a deep dive on this because Disney Star Wars tends to not think too deeply about the lore of certain designs, and they just throw things in as Easter eggs, visual references, member berries. But I thought if we're going to analyze the design, if it does happen to have a significance to the characters and the show, the time periods SM-33 and his former captain lived through, then it could be worth discussing. If this is from the Age of the Republic, the prequel trilogy, then the closest design I can think of in terms of the Clone Wars era is a single version of the Jedi Temple Guard double saber. They also contain some of those golden stripes. So, because a couple of you asked, those are my thoughts on the lightsaber hilt. Another little breakdown I want to do is on the character of Pocket, the bounty hunter who Jod once knew and double-crossed, left for dead, who now reported him to Brutus, and the pirates showed up, they had their coordinates. Well, she's an interesting character because we still don't know her species. The new episode guide doesn't confirm it, but my guess is that she's an Umbaran, the same species as Sly Moore, one of the closest confidants to Emperor Palpatine himself, and someone who, by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if we see in Andor Season 2. The very pale skin and the colourless eyes gave this away, but I suppose she could also be a different species, a similar one, maybe a cage. Lucasfilm has not specified. There were a couple of disputes to the Umbaran theory saying, well, why does she have hair? While it's customary for Umbarans to shave their heads, there were occasions where some members of the species chose not to, and didn't. Especially if you're a bounty hunter or a smuggler, you might decide to live by your own rules and go your own way. And if Pocket sounded familiar to you, Kelly MacDonald is also the voice of Merida in Brave. I was like, oh my goodness, it's the lady from Brave. Okay, so now it's time to geek out over some aliens. Not the main ones, let's talk about some that you may have missed. I love when Star Wars goes full weird with their alien designs. They recycled a lot from The Last Jedi in this episode, but there were also some unidentified ones. But I have a suspicion about one of them. When our main characters enter the sanctuary on Lanupa, we see a four-armed harpist. And at first, I was just focused on how cool this was. Upon closer examination, I realized there are three possibilities, the latter two being fascinating. Either she belongs to a new, unidentified Star Wars species, or she's a female Zegsto, that's the species of Gazgano, the pod racer from Episode 1, or more intriguingly, she's a female Quemian, the same species as Jedi Master Yariel Puth. Yet another Phantom Menace callback. Granted, she's not as tall as your average Quemian, and she doesn't appear to have as long of a neck, but the legs are very similar. Wouldn't that be amazing? A female canon on-screen live-action Quemian. I am leaning towards her being a Zegsto, just based on the face shape. Some of the females of the species do have that Kaminoan look, and that was something emphasized in the new encyclopedia. But on the subject of aliens, I still can't get over the bathing Munes. That's something I can imagine George Lucas being very proud of. Also guys, when Jod and the children land on Lanupa, the children are disguised as what is known as Bratric Wise Elders. We don't know if this is something Jod just made up, or if this is a real species they're going to explore at a later date. George Lucas' Star Wars was full of this kind of thing, name-dropping planets, places, and species, only to be explored by a book, or a comic, or a cartoon. Think of the name drop of Ord Mantell in The Empire Strikes Back, and then Star Wars Animation picked it up, and it was prominent in The Bad Batch. Another cool tidbit, the massive creature one of the guests at the resort of Skullridge Mountain was Cthulhups, who has a similar name and design as the cosmic entity Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. Was that a bit too on the nose? But the Star Wars equivalent of Mr. Krabs was a good laugh. Something else I just want to point out, we should be very excited because the next episode is directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, one of the most talented people working at Lucasfilm in my opinion. I hope she was assigned a more exciting episode than she was in The Mandalorian Season 3. But remember guys, writers and directors are very different things. She was not responsible for some of the awful creative decisions in that episode, and she's directed some of the best in Mando Season 1, Season 2. She was the one who got to direct Bo-Katan's first ever live-action appearance, Chapter 11 The Heiress, and I loved her work in the Book of Boba Fett. Considering lightsabers are now in play, there's conflict between Jod and the children, the New Republic's gonna show up probably, pirates are on his tail, this should be a very enthralling one. Are you excited?